Hi, I'm Monique Schafter. Today on The Filter, we're talking emojis. Yes, emojis. What seemed like a kooky text messaging fad has now become a global language used by around 3 billion people, including our elected representatives.
I'm going to answer in emoji.
You could argue that emojis are essentially updated hieroglyphics, but the modern form can be traced back to the punctuation-based emoticon, which first appeared in 1982. The first set of symbols that went by the name emoji was created in Japan in 1999, but they really took off once they were incorporated into iPhone messaging in 2011. Now there are 2,666 symbols and growing. Not to mention Apple's latest innovation, which blends the user's facial expressions to create what's known as the Animoji.
You just watch this, can't you?
While it might be tempting to dismiss emojis as a pop culture phenomenon, they're also invading the literary establishment. The Oxford Dictionary's 2015 Word of the Year was this emoji, and even Herman Melville's literary masterpiece Moby Dick has been emojified. So where is this going? If emoji represents the rise of the visual over the textual, can it be considered a liberating new language? Or does it suggest the slow degradation and decline of written and spoken communication? To discuss these ideas, I'm joined by Elizabeth McMahon, editor of esteemed literary journal Southerly, Osman Faruqi, who writes for online magazine Junkee, and unapologetic emoji user and Triple J producer Claire Bracken. Claire, as a digital producer of Australia's youth radio station, you must speak fluent emoji.
I do, correct. What do you want to know?
When would you use them?
I use them with text all the time. I actually have used them in articles. I use them talking with friends. My mum is now obsessed with them, so I talked to my mum about them. She got really sad when she got a new phone and she didn't have the smiley little guys on them. So I had to quickly get them on there. But yeah, I use them pretty frequently.
When you said you use them in articles, is that like articles that you might be talking about specific emojis, or you just drop them in?
Just drop them in.
A general story about anything?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's when they're most kind of exciting. If I get an email from somebody at work and it's, going through some tedious process we have to do, and then there's a little emoji at the end. It's like reminding us that, there is pleasure still, and the contrast between the two is really great.
I'm also a big advocate of emojis. I use them in my personal communications, use them in articles as often as I can, in headlines if I can get away with it, in images. But I actually think that the example of the Moby Dick book being done as emoji is actually not the right way to do it. It just seems like you're trying to shoehorn what is an evolving way of communicating and then kind of put it back just to kind of generate a headline, or
bit of a gimmick.
Just as a gimmick to show off that you can do it. But for me, it's not about saying how can we convert older texts to emoji form. Emojis have their own meanings. They adapt over time, and so now emojis can mean totally different things. So there's a moon face emoji that is pretty popular. That really has nothing to do with the moon. It indicates something a bit more salacious, without getting into too much detail.
Sinister even.
Sinister even. And I think that's one of my favorite things about watching how emojis develop, is how they just all of a sudden seem to get this cultural context and everyone knows about it all of a sudden.
But if my mum uses the eggplant emoji, I assume she's cooking eggplant. I don't think anything else. But whereas amongst friends,
we know what the eggplant means.
We know.
If you guys are using emojis in your articles to sort of help connect with younger readers, are you at all concerned that we could have a generation of young people sort of raised on symbols rather than text?
I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not either, yeah. We use it to supplement things going on, and sometimes it's because an emoji captures something, whether it's a phrase or a feeling, better than words can. It's not as though I'm trying really hard to connect with the youth. It's just how our audience reads and engages with the stuff. It's how I engage with stuff. And so it just seems like a more natural way of communicating. What do you reckon?
I agree, I totally agree. It's shorthand for so many things, and it makes sense if you're talking to an audience that is like your friends, you talk to them like you would your friends. Right. Yeah.
I think there's room, when you talk about shorthand, I think there's room for longhand, a big time for longhand even on the conveying of emotion to people. In the work that it takes you to say, this is how I feel, that kind of complexity is also worthwhile. And I think that is being degraded, but that's not at emoji's door. Right. I think that the cause is everything has to be fast, and that things are valued and given monetary value because they're fast.
We're seeing a growing use of visual communication, whether it's emojis, animated GIFs, stuff like that. Why are we heading down this path?
I just know, with articles, if you break it up with a GIF, people tend to stay on it longer and people will actually read to the end. So it's almost like you need the picture to break it up. BuzzFeed's whole model is like sentence, GIF, and thousands and millions of people read them every day. So
yeah, I wrote an article explaining this year's federal budget using just Drake GIFs representing Drake. But I think sometimes a GIF like an emoji, if people know the context where it's coming from, like if it's an iconic scene from a TV show or a film, it's not just something there that's visually pleasing. It's like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about and this is what that means. That's right. Yeah, and often the Obama mic drop GIF, that's like one of my favorite. That just like is so useful in so many contexts.
I'm not disagreeing, but I do have a reservation about the spectacularisation of everything in relation to, in my defence of literature. There is this kind of lack of spectacular, lack of visuality that literature suffers from, you know, in its perception with government, in its perception in educational institutions. I'd like to see us still maintaining that kind of capacity to sit with a literary text that is kind of so activated on all these levels of visuals and sounds and analytical meanings or philosophy or character or whatever it does, all those things going on at once. You don't need anything else. In fact, you can't have anything else for that to work. You know?
I think that's a really interesting point, because even though Claire and I are saying that we include these sorts of things because the audience is interested in them, I think there's a problem with that in a way, because you know we'll often write quite longer pieces that we think are about important issues like refugee policy, and it's hard to break those up with funny GIFs. Like, it's a very serious issue and they just won't get engaged with as much as other stories, and I think that's disappointing in a way. I think that trend that we're seeing people engage less with that stuff in some regards and more with the shorter bite-sized visually pleasing stuff, I'm a little bit concerned about that for the reasons that you were talking about as well.
Skin tone variations were only recently added to emojis. Why do you think it took so long, and is that problematic?
It's a really, really interesting question. Like, the generic emoji color is kind of yellow across the board. It's like a Simpsons kind of thing where like maybe it's a way to get away from these kind of awkward questions around race, but a lot of people felt as though they didn't feel like emojis represented them, and there was some agitation. There's an emoji consortium, I think, based in the UK that decides these things, and Unicode, and then they rolled out the skin tone variations, and I think a lot of people have found that quite liberating because they feel like they can express themselves more personally than they were able to before. One of the interesting trends that I've noticed in the last year is people representing themselves in emoji with skin colors that might not necessarily be their own. You often see people who are very, very white using very, very dark emojis. And I wonder whether it is even something worth getting angry about, but some of the people that I've spoken to, they feel as though there are a lot of issues that affect people from minority backgrounds, and white people tend to not really care or engage with those issues, except when they want to look cooler by adopting darker skin color emojis or using certain gestures and phrases, and I think that's where the tension comes from.
It's a bit of emoji blackface.
Yeah, that's a good phrase, I think. Yeah.
I'm with them being offended. You know, I think that it's not their position to say all identities are there as a smorgasbord for me to occupy. In fact, some people are still fighting for identities, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Emojis are constantly evolving. We started out with emoticons, and now the latest smartphone is even using face scanning technology to kind of depict your own face in an emoji. Where do you think this is heading?
I think that's awesome. I have ordered one of those phones largely for the purpose of using the emoji thing, but it could be really interesting to have conversations with people, because you can then represent yourself via an emoji, and whether that then takes the place of like what avatars used to be like on online kind of chat forums and things. So kind of going full circle.
Like with that, I have had friends who like sometimes they get quite anxious about writing back to text, and they just like, I don't know what it is, but it's like, okay, it's me. It's not a friend. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to write, so just be like a quick emoji and something like that. Like maybe someone can't talk today, but they can be an emoji.
I'm fascinated by the people wanting to merge into the emoji, because it looks like the original emojis were like pleasurable because they were so distant from you. You know, they were so impersonal and generic, a smiley face, they were so basic in that way.
I think the thing with the Animoji that attracts me a little bit, because sometimes you do want to express something like, you know, using your face or whatever. Maybe this expresses my insecurities a little bit too much, but you don't often always feel like my face looks good enough to take a selfie, right?
Front
like,
cameras are very
front
confronting.
Cameras can be very confronting, but with an Animoji you can express the emotions, but like it's kind of, you know, it's a cute peek instead of me, so there's no drama about worrying about how you'll look.
Do you guys have a favourite emoji?
My go-to is probably the smug face. You know, the guy with the like, okay. You know the guy. I like him.
I like the moon face one, just because like it can mean so many different things.
Because I like the clapping one so much. I like the dynamism of that.
Osman, Claire and Elizabeth, thanks so much for chatting today. Next time we can do it via emoji, via text.
Awesome, thank you.
You're so overrated.